Hello everybody and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips, and I'll start with some great news. We had our first hearing in our landmark lawsuit last week, and everything went really well. Nothing got thrown out. Proceeding right to discovery. There will be subpoenas issued and all kinds of exciting things going on. So we'll put out an official announcement, and we're going to set up some way to keep everybody informed so that you can go to a website or a Facebook page or something where you can get updates every week, because there is going to be an enormous amount of activity concerning this lawsuit. So we'll just for now, let's just suffice it to say that things went as well as could be expected. And one of the things that I'm going to do is sometime this week, when I am with our attorney, I'll film one of these videos with him. We're going to set up some events where those of you who live in driving distance of Columbus can come and spend an afternoon or evening with Tom and learn more about this, and some teleconference events for those of you who live further away and wouldn't be able to join us for a live session. So more access and more information coming soon, but just suffice it to say that we got through the first hearing, which was expedited. It happened 8 days after the filing was made, and doesn't get much better than that, and that everything that we wanted to see happen at that hearing happened, and we feel very good about it. All right, I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I just want to let you know about a couple of other things. Remember that we are also posting on Parler and BitChute, so if for whatever reason YouTube didn't post my videos anymore, you'd be able to find us there. Conference calls to learn more about Make Americans Free Again are scheduled for Sunday, September 13th, Tuesday the 15th, Sunday the 20th. I've got them scheduled all through the beginning of October. I try to do one weekday and one Sunday night because I know that everybody's schedule's crazy. They're all the same, so only choose one. But if you would like to participate in a conference call, learn more about what we're doing, ask questions, that sort of thing, please answer me at pampopper@msn.com, and we will get you all set up. You guys ask all the time about, can you give me the supporting document for this or that? We can't. We get hundreds of requests every day, and we're just not librarians here. And the other thing that you have to remember is that a lot of the information that I provide in video clips is transient. Policies change, data changes, etc. And so we try to create stable information and also a lot of prohibited information, if you know what I mean, in the newsletter, referenced and all that sort of thing. So if you're looking for that kind of thing, subscribe to the newsletter. Again, pampopper@msn.com. But please don't ask us to try and gather up, 2 hours worth of video clips and references, some of which will be changed by the time you look at it. And we just don't want to do that. All right, so trying to do everything we can here to help and offer as much stuff as we can for free, but there's just a limit. All righty. Careers, upcoming classes, Cancer 201 Alternative Treatments is turning into a long series. It was originally going to be 4 classes, and now it's going to probably go for at least a dozen, probably into next year. We're not charging more for the course. We're just extending it because there's so much information to cover. Chronic fatigue is coming up soon. And our Tuesday nights at Wellness Forum with cooking classes and that sort of thing are back. So Tuesday at 6 o'clock here. So if you're in Central Ohio, come congregate with like-minded people. Food's always good. Curriculum's always good, but a lot of times it's food-related, cooking classes, that sort of thing. So check our online schedule and do stop by. We'd love to meet you. And we know that we're growing our Columbus audience as well as our worldwide audience. So I wanted to talk today. I want to come back to the lawsuit thing. And I know everybody was anxious to hear, which is why I started by telling you it went great. We were so excited. But, when we were getting ready to file this, got a lot of, you go and we're behind you, and a lot of excitement that finally the right kind of lawsuit was getting filed that alleges that that this is not true. There's no pandemic and all these numbers are ginned up and that sort of thing. So we had a lot of that, but we also had a lot of people who just feel very defeated. The legal system doesn't work and nobody can get anything done. And I totally understand how you can arrive at that conclusion. But I don't want you to keep that conclusion and that thought, because then you give up all hope, and when hope is gone, really life is not worth living so much anymore. So what I did was, first of all, I wanted to tell you that we're making progress. And I know that we're going to have setbacks along the way. I've never done anything in my life where it was just smooth sailing. And I don't think anybody ever does anything worthwhile in their life where that's the case. But I don't want people to feel discouraged. And so I found some information from the American Institute for Economic Research about lawsuits, not just here, but in foreign countries and that sort of thing, and legal perspective. And then I dug up some stuff in addition to what they provided. But a lot of the information I'm going to give you today is from this particular organization. And I've used their articles before in video clips because I think that they develop, it's just a fabulous library that they've created. And I enjoy reading their articles very much. But I think that you'll be very encouraged by the possibilities of what can happen through the legal system and to resolve some of the egregious stuff that's going on around the country and around the world. All right, so the first thing in this article, over 240 Belgians, mostly from the business community, are suing Bill Gates, the Belgian government, and Dr. Neil Ferguson. Now, he is the guy that developed the wildly inaccurate model that said millions of people were going to die of COVID-19 and had also developed other inaccurate models. I mean, it's astounding how he's never been right about anything, which just does beg the question, why were so many quote-unquote experts who are supposed to be so much smarter than I am, why did they buy into it? I mean, call me crazy, but I like to look at people's track record when I decide whether or not I'm going to listen to what they say and whether or not I'm going to do business with that person or a company or whoever, right? So anyway, here are some highlights from the article. They quote an author, a professor by the name of Barry Brownstein. He's a professor emeritus of economics and leadership at the University of Baltimore. And here's what he had to say about Ferguson. He says, Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College London had inordinate influence advising national governments on pathogen outbreaks. Ferguson listens to Gates as his center receives tens of millions of dollars in annual funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The model Ferguson used to advise draconian lockdowns in response to COVID-19 has been thoroughly discredited both on theoretical and empirical grounds. To err is human, but this was not Ferguson's first disastrous prediction. As AIER President Edward Peter Stringham points out, Ferguson rose to fame in 2005 when he predicted that up to 200 million people could be killed from the bird flu. The actual number of deaths was 50. You know, there is a very big disconnect between 200 million and 50. And again, I continue to ask this question, how knowledgeable health authorities, or purportedly knowledgeable health authorities in the United States, would have taken anything that this guy said seriously. And by the way, that's just one of many. And what's interesting is if you go back and look at Ferguson's track record, he started making inaccurate predictions, and how inaccurate they were became worse and worse and worse over time. In other words, he didn't hone his skills and get better. He got worse over time, which just makes you wonder, why does he have a job? Why does anybody listen to anything he has to say? I mean, I just can't answer that question, but it still bothers me quite a bit for obvious reasons. Well, the Belgian group that's suing is called Viruswaanzin, which translates to viral madness in Dutch. And they say, and I think that this is the common claim, that these lockdowns have caused incredible suffering and harm, and relied on false information. And that's the problem. You know, we needed to, as soon as the information was deemed to be false, what should have been happening is all the government should have been making a big right turn to go in a different direction, but they didn't do that. So anyway, the group is asking for £10,000 per, or EUs per, or euros, haha, not EUs, euros, per plaintiff for each day that the measures remain in place. So we're talking about enormous financial damages, which means that the governments will have an incentive to fight like crazy not to have to pay it out, but the attorneys have a tremendous payday ahead if they can actually make this happen. So they also claim in the lawsuit, which I think is very important, that the flow of information was carefully controlled so that there wasn't any debate. And I think that's a complaint that we have here in the United States, is that if you read our complaint, which is posted on the MakeAmericansFreeAgain.com website, and the supporting evidence for it, 627 pages of supporting evidence, you're going to see a narrative and a set of facts, well-documented set of facts. I think there are 288 references in the complaint itself that should have been part of the discussion. In other words, I think that ideas should be subjected to debate. We're complaining that the other side would not allow us to debate. Well, our ideas should be subject to debate too. It's actually going to happen in a courtroom instead of in citizens and government having these discussions, and it's unfortunate that it got to that. But these kinds of things have to be addressed, and to just basically say you have a different idea so you can't talk about it is not an appropriate response. So that's what the group is claiming here too. This is not just happening in Belgium and in Ohio here where we filed our complaint. It's happening all over the place. I was very encouraged to see, and the article reports, South Africa's High Court ruled that some of the level 3 and 4 lockdown measures put in place to slow the spread of COVID-19 were, quote, unconstitutional and invalid, ordering a 14-day period to overhaul the restrictions. And boy, that would be a wonderful gift if we just said, listen, we're going to take a couple of weeks here and figure this out instead of, I'll be reporting later this week on what's going on in Ohio, instead of here comes some new rules and regulations and some new stuff we dreamed up over the weekend that you people have to live with. At the start of the pandemic, just to make a note of this, South Africa had the most restrictive lockdown measures, including a ban on alcohol and cigarette sales, which I'm sure might have been a good idea, but probably made people crazier than they already were because of lockdowns. The lawsuit was filed by the Liberty Fighters Network Advocacy Group in May and argued that the ANC government's reaction to the epidemic violated South Africa's Bill of Rights. And by the way, that's the basis for which a lot of claims were filed here in the United States. And while it's true, we think that we're going to be more successful by basically filing the claim that there is no emergency, calling it what it is. There is no emergency at this point in time. It's crystal clear there's no emergency, so therefore any actions taken would not be appropriate. And so state governments have, in the United States, have definitely overstepped their constitutional bounds. And here is some legal background that might help you. And the reason I'm going into this again is I just really want to address the people who are throwing up their hands and saying, why bother? So one thing that gets thrown around a lot is a 1905 Supreme Court case known as Jacobson v. Massachusetts. And the case has been cited in public health restrictions for a long, long time. But what happened was this guy named Jacobson in Massachusetts did not want to get a smallpox vaccine at a time that it was deemed necessary. And so the Supreme Court ruled against him, but I think it's important to note that the Supreme Court did not say Jacobson had to get a vaccine. They said he had to pay the fine. So I want to clear that up because that's a common misinterpretation. The other thing is that the laws have to be reasonable, not arbitrary, and tailored to the government's interest in preserving public safety. So we really have verged on crossing over the line of are we really dealing with public safety or something else? There's another interesting case that the article from the American Institute for Economic Research cited called Juho versus V. Williamson, which nullified a lockdown of San Francisco, interestingly enough, early last century. And the appellate court said it does not at all follow that every statute enacted ostensibly for the promotion of these ends is to be accepted as a legitimate exertion of the police powers of the state. In this particular case, what had happened was certain counties in San Francisco were quarantined due to an outbreak of bubonic plague. The successful plaintiff alleged that the order was not only enforced arbitrarily against persons of Chinese descent, but that there was not even a single case of plague in their area. The court held that under the circumstances, the general quarantine of the whole district could not be continued by reason of the fact that it was unreasonable, unjust, and oppressive, and therefore contrary to the laws limiting the police powers of the state and municipality in such matters. And so another legal perspective cited in the article that goes to this point, government may restrict fundamental rights, however, only if government has compelling purpose. Restriction is narrowly tailored towards solving the problem, and the burden of proof is on the government. So I think that this case, basically, that I cited from San Francisco, may become important in some of these cases, because we hear all the time from people who say, listen, we have a population of 500,000 people and 12 people died, and there hasn't been a death in 3 months, and so, what are we doing? So I think there's legal precedent that we can rely on here. So anyway, kind of moving on here, there are a lot of people, respected people, and this goes to the point that we're not having the type of discussion that we should be having. Lots of people who come from prestigious institutions and have very impressive backgrounds, like John Ioannidis at Stanford University, and he's been saying for a long time that, yeah, we should pay attention to this. Yes, there are vulnerable populations. Nobody, including me, has said, let's just ignore this whole thing. What a lot of people have been saying is the response is irrational, and the longer that it goes on, the more irrational it seems. And it's actually not addressing at all the issues that we should be addressing, right? So anyway, we have quite a few data points now. I think one of the things that was very good was that there were no national lockdown orders issued from the federal government, which means that we have these variations in states that we can look at. And so we have a lot of people claiming, and I think that this claim will be made in court, but it's fairly easy to refute at this point in time, that the lockdowns actually saved lives and it was a good idea. But we have these pesky states that refuse to do it. So Utah, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Wyoming, and Arkansas never issued stay-at-home orders, and their restrictions were pretty minimal. And all 7 of these are better than many of the lockdown states in terms of per capita deaths. You have some population differences, and we really have to take that into consideration. But in any case, if you take a look at per capita deaths, you're going to see that the states that did not do all this draconian stuff did a whole lot better than the states that did. So we really don't have justification in terms of data. Now, just to give you an idea, in South Dakota, and yes, we have a population difference, but there were 159 deaths in South Dakota versus 16,046 in New Jersey. So New Jersey's still locked down tight, still going after businesses for being open and all that sort of thing. Even with the population difference, that's significant. Utah, 383 deaths as opposed to Connecticut, locked down tight, 4,460 as of the date these data were created, and by the way, are gathered. And this is why I said in the beginning, and we're not putting references and going to all the trouble to post stuff, because by the time you go look this up, there will be more deaths in Utah and there will be more deaths in Connecticut. The proportion will be the same, but it just allows for people to say, you said there were 383 deaths and now there's 586. Yes, that's right, because you're looking at data that is older than the data. But if you look at the proportionality, you're going to see exactly the same thing. So anyway, the problem, I think, really comes down to, and the article addresses this, is that we could have a long discussion about whether the 2 weeks to flatten the curve is a good idea. And there are differences of opinion there. And by the way, we should be having these discussions about differences of opinion. Intelligent, reasonable people should be able to sit down and give contrary points of view and arrive at conclusions that are reasonable on both sides. And the fact that that hasn't happened is part of what has fueled so much distrust and so many problems and arguments amongst people who normally would be able to get along. And I really blame the government for that it's made it so people can't talk to each other, and I think that might have been part of the goal. But anyway, to keep going here, just through some more information I think is important and will be used in lawsuits, because I want you to know there are constitutional grounds for suing. All right. Another thing is the effect on business. And I want to point out here, I call it the sucker's choice. And this is where people are put in a position to think that there are 2 choices only, both of them really bad, but you have to choose one of them. And in the case of the lockdowns in businesses, it's like you either care about people, and then however much destruction takes place is justified because you care about people. So if you lose your business and you lose your livelihood and your house is foreclosed on and your utilities are shut off and your kids are out of school, that's just the price we have to pay to save lives. The other ridiculous side of this is that we just don't care about COVID. We don't care about elderly people. And, both of those are crazy ideas. And we need to be able to find common ground. We look at what should we be doing to protect vulnerable people without unreasonably inflicting harm on the rest of the population. And so, if you look at anybody's psychological information and studies, many people find meaning, I know I do, in the work that we do. I get up in the morning to live for the work that I do because I think it helps mankind. Now, we could debate, maybe you don't think that, but I'm very purpose-driven. And if I didn't have a reason to get up in the morning and I didn't have something to do that I thought was important, I think it would be terrible for my quality of life and that sort of thing. So when we take people's businesses away, this isn't just all about, well, you're a capitalist and you want everybody to make money. This is all about how do you expect people to feed their families and what happens to family structure, homelessness, food insecurity. I mean, these are not minor problems, and destroying somebody's life's work is not something that should be done without some consideration, and I don't think that's an unreasonable point of view. So anyway, an article in a journal called Lexology explains that people may be able to sue for constitutionally guaranteed remedies like just compensation under the Takings Clause or protection of private agreements under the Contracts Clause. Under the Takings Clause, private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation, and that's what happened. And it was also done incredibly arbitrarily. So the fact that big box stores could sell the same products that smaller stores could sell, and they were allowed to stay open while smaller merchants had to close, is a major problem. It's going to be a problem for the authorities in court. The author cites the Fifth Amendment, which sets forth just compensation for government confiscation of private property. He also furthers his point with a variety of court cases that raise the possibility that stay-at-home orders could be reasonably interpreted as a form of government taking in the name of the public interest. And then separation of powers. This is another area of the law that I think is very interesting that the AIER points out, and that is that we have checks and balances in our government. And so a quote from the article, governors and mayors can make all the dictatorial pronouncements and threats that they wish, but they cannot use public assets to enforce them. And when they seek to use force, those from whom they seek it should decline the offer. And this has happened, by the way, with numerous sheriffs around the country who publicly stated, I'm not going to be involved in this. And I think other law enforcement would like to say that. They're put in a bad position. But basically, the Wisconsin Supreme Court recently struck down part of Governor Tony Evers' stay-at-home order because the governor and State Department of Health Services enacted the order without any oversight from the legislature, which violated the state constitution. So the bottom line is that when we start making branches of government irrelevant, that's really the pathway to tyranny, and I don't think any of us wants to end up there. And so there's a lot to disagree with, and I know a lot of people disagree with me. And one of the things that I say to the people who disagree with me is that thank God we live in a country where it's okay for me to say something and it's okay for you to disagree with it. And what I'm trying to do is preserve that. Because if we allow all of this to go unchecked and unchallenged, what kind of country are we going to live in? I think it's going to be a country we don't want to live in. It's going to be a country where one person or a group of persons, like a health director and a governor, can just say, we've decided to declare an emergency. So one of the things a couple things I want to finish up with here. This video turned out to be a whole lot longer than I was intending it to be. But I wanted to do this, and I wanted to provide this detail because people who watch this and really think it's all hopeless, it's not hopeless. And I don't want you to feel that way, because if I thought that nothing could be done, I wouldn't have risked my reputation. I wouldn't have invested what I've invested in this. I wouldn't be working 18, 19, 20 hours a day on it. There's a lot of other stuff I'd like to be doing with my time, frankly. But I think that there is something that can be done about it, and I think we're starting to prove that here. I think the second thing is that there are valid grounds for constitutional challenges in the courts, and we're starting to see those happen. We're beginning this process. Others are going to join in, and we want to help lawyers in other states do the same thing that's being done here. But the last thing that I want to talk about is I think that what we have got to start having, and once we get out from under the situation that we're in, which is untenable. I mean, people cannot go on not seeing their family members in nursing homes. We can't go on having private weddings in the courthouse and no celebrations and 10 people at a funeral, and this just is not a sustainable way to live. But what I'd like to see happen is that we, at some point in time, and I hope it's a civil discussion, get into a discussion in the courts and every place else that we can about what is the definition of a public emergency, health emergency. Who is allowed to declare it? And for how long can it go on? And what is the, who has oversight? I mean, all of the things that allowed this mess to happen and to unfold the way that it did, we have to put some checks and balances in place so that it can't happen again. And I think that's worth doing. I think it's worth investing. I don't know. I started out thinking this was going to be over this year. I don't think it's going to be over this year at all. But however much time it takes. Fortunately, I'm not young, but I'm healthy, and much to the chagrin of my opponents. And I intend to see this through. And I think that these are interesting discussions that we should have, and looking forward to having them in a civil way. With people coming to the table to discuss this rather than being so polarized. All right, that's obviously quite enough for today. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy learning more about all these issues. My email address is pampopper@msn.com. Participate in our Make Americans Free Again conference calls. Go to our website, look at our complaint and supporting material under the legal section. I think it's very interesting reading, if I say so myself. And if you like what we're doing, we're not taking any money from anybody for any of this stuff, but if you like what we're doing, buy something from our company, which is Wellness Forum Health, wellnessforumhealth.com. Back to you tomorrow with more news.